Hashtag Alien Envoy issues warning. Humanity's fury shakes, even gods. The crystalline halls of the Galactic Council trembled as Ambassador Zethkar stepped forward, his 6 arms clasped in the traditional gesture of urgent proclamation. The assembled representatives from across the galaxy fell silent, their various forms of communication ceasing as one. In the center of the vast chamber, holographic displays showed a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. Earth. Zethkar's voice resonated through the translation matrix, reaching every being present in their native tongue. Honored Council, I come before you today not as a representative of my people, but as one who has witnessed something that defies all our understanding of warfare, determination, and the very nature of sentient life. The Altarian delegate, her gossamer wings flickering with curiosity, leaned forward. What could possibly warrant such dramatics, Ambassador? We have seen countless species rise and fall. What makes these humans so different? The Vorthak war chief growled from his position among the military observers. His species had conquered 17 systems through sheer brutality, and his scarred hide bore testament to countless battles. They're a young species, barely past their first atomic age. What threat could they possibly pose to the established order? Zethkar's compound eyes fixed on each speaker in turn. His people, the Kethmori, were known throughout the galaxy as master strategists and military advisors. They had guided empires through wars that lasted millennia, had seen the rise and fall of 1,000 civilizations. Yet today, his usually steady voice carried an undertone that made even the most battle-hardened veterans shift uncomfortably. 3 months ago, the human colony on Kepler 442b was attacked by raiders from the Skarn Collective. Zethkar began, his words measured and deliberate. It was meant to be a simple raid. The Skarn needed slaves and resources, and humans seemed like easy prey. After all, they had only just established their first extrasolar colonies. Their technology was primitive by our standards, their ships barely capable of interstellar travel. The chamber's atmosphere grew tense. Many present had heard whispers of the incident, but few knew the full details. The Skarn Collective was known for their efficiency in slave raids, striking fast and disappearing before any meaningful response could be mounted. The human colony had no military presence, Zethkar continued. 17,000 civilians, mostly families and researchers. The Skarn descended upon them with 3 heavy cruisers and a full battle group. Standard protocol for dealing with primitive species. The ethereal observer, a being of pure energy that rarely spoke, manifested a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. We are aware of the Skarn methods, Ambassador. Please proceed to the relevant information. Zethkar's mandibles clicked in what his species used to express grim amusement. The relevant information, honored observer, is that the Skarn made a critical error in judgment. They assumed that because humanity was technologically inferior, they would respond as most species do when faced with overwhelming force. They expected surrender, negotiation, or at best, a token resistance. He activated a holographic display showing the attack. The peaceful colony, with its modest habitation domes and research facilities, was suddenly filled with chaos as Skarn shock troops descended from the sky. The footage, recovered from security systems, showed scenes of terror as civilians fled in all directions. The Skarn took their time, Zethkar said, his voice hardening. They made examples of the first humans they captured, broadcasting their torture across all communication frequencies to break the spirit of the survivors. They killed the elderly and infirm, declaring them worthless as slaves. They separated families, taking the children to break the will of the parents. Several council members shifted uncomfortably. While slavery was not uncommon in many parts of the galaxy, the deliberate cruelty described was excessive even by those standards. But here's where the Skarn made their fatal miscalculation, Zethkar said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, forcing the entire assembly to strain to hear him. They expected the human government to negotiate for the return of their people. They expected to leverage the hostages for territory, resources, or favorable trade agreements. What they did not expect was the response they received. The holographic display shifted, showing transmission logs from Earth's government. A simple message, repeated on all frequencies, in every language the human database contained. Return our people unharmed, or face the consequences. The Vorthak war chief laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the chamber. Empty threats from a species that can barely reach their own moon. What consequences could they possibly deliver? Zethkar turned to face the war chief directly. That, honored warrior, is exactly what the Skarn commander thought. He responded by executing 100 hostages in view of the orbital cameras, broadcasting their deaths directly to Earth. He demanded the complete surrender of 3 human systems and threatened to kill every remaining hostage if his demands were not met within 1 solar day. The chamber fell silent again, the weight of the Skarn's cruelty settling over the assembly like a dark cloud. Many species had faced similar ultimatums, and most had been forced to capitulate to save their people. The human response, Zethkar continued, arrived 18 hours later. The display changed again, showing long-range sensor readings from the edge of the Kepler 442 system. At first, there was nothing unusual. Then, space itself seemed to tear open as hundreds of ships emerged from hyperspace jumps, so violent they left residual energy signatures that lasted for days. Impossible, breathed the Centauri delegate. Our intelligence reports indicated that humanity possessed perhaps 50 ships capable of interstellar travel, mostly converted cargo vessels, and exploration craft. That was our assessment as well, Zethkar agreed. What emerged from hyperspace that day was a fleet of over 800 vessels, ships that had not existed in any database, constructed with technologies that defied our understanding of human capabilities. It was as if they had been hiding their true strength all along. The truth was even more staggering, though Zethkar would reveal it slowly, building to the revelation that would shake the Council to its core. The humans had not been hiding existing ships. They had built this entire fleet in the 18 hours since receiving word of the attack. The lead vessel, Zethkar said, highlighting a massive dreadnought on the display, transmitted a single message to the Skarn commander, for words that would echo through every military academy in the galaxy for generations to come. He paused, letting the tension build before delivering the message that had changed everything. You chose poorly. Prepare. The first shots of what historians would later call the 18-hour war had been fired the moment those words reached the Skarn fleet. But the true horror for the galaxy's established powers was not in the violence that followed, but in the revelation of what humanity was truly capable of when pushed beyond all reason. The Skarn had awakened something that had been sleeping in the human soul since their species first looked up at the stars and wondered what lay beyond their small blue world. They had awakened the fury of a species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of war, not for conquest, but for survival. As the holographic display began showing the first moments of the engagement, every being in the chamber realized they were about to witness something unprecedented in galactic history. The systematic dismantling of a superior force by a species that should not have been capable of such devastation. Zethkar watched their faces change as the reality began to sink in. These humans, these supposedly primitive beings from a backwater system, had just redefined what was possible in modern warfare. And this was only the beginning of the revelation that would change the galaxy forever. Hashtag Alien Envoy issues warning. Humanity's fury shakes even God's. The silence in the Galactic Council chamber was absolute as Zethkar manipulated the holographic controls with surgical precision. The display zoomed in on the human fleet, revealing details that made several military advisors lean forward in disbelief. The first thing our analysts noticed, Zethkar continued, was not the size of the human fleet, but its composition. These were not the converted civilian vessels we had expected, nor were they the crude warships typical of emerging species. Each vessel showed design principles that suggested centuries of military engineering experience. The Altarian delegate's wings shimmered with agitation. Ambassador, our deep space monitors have been observing human space for decades. These vessels never existed. Where did they originate? That question haunted our intelligence services for weeks, Zethkar replied, until we discovered the answer, buried in human communication intercepts that our translators had previously dismissed as impossible. The humans had not pulled these ships from hidden reserves. They had manufactured the entire fleet in the time between learning of the attack and arriving at Kepler 442b. The Vorthack war chief rose from his seat, his massive frame towering over nearby delegates. 18 hours? You expect us to believe that a primitive species constructed 800 warships in 18 hours? Our own shipyards require years to build a single heavy cruiser. Your disbelief is understandable, Zethkar acknowledged. It mirrors our own reaction when we first compiled the evidence. But the truth is even more staggering than simple rapid construction. The humans did not merely build these ships quickly. They revolutionized their entire industrial base to do so. The display shifted to show surveillance footage from Earth's orbital platforms. The planet's surface was alive with activity that defied conventional understanding. Massive construction platforms materialized in Earth's orbit seemingly from nowhere, their frameworks extending like metallic flowers blooming in the void. Within 3 hours of receiving word of the attack, Zethkar narrated, every human manufacturing facility on Earth, Luna, and Mars had been retooled for warship production. Civilian factories producing everything from food processors to entertainment systems began churning out ship components with efficiency ratings that exceed theoretical maximums. The footage showed assembly lines moving at impossible speeds, robotic systems working with precision that seemed almost supernatural. Humans moved between the machinery like dancers in a choreographed performance, each knowing exactly their role in the greater symphony of destruction being composed. But the truly remarkable aspect, Zethkar continued, was not their industrial capacity, but their unity of purpose. In 18 hours, humanity transformed from a peaceful, spacefaring civilization into a war machine of unprecedented efficiency. There were no political debates, no resource allocation disputes, no bureaucratic delays. The entire species moved as one organism with a single objective. The Centauri delegate, his crystalline features flickering with concern, spoke up. Such coordination is impossible without a hive mind structure. Humans are individuals, are they not? How could they achieve such perfect synchronization? We wonder the same thing, Zethkar admitted. Our behavioral analysts spent months studying the data. What they found challenges our fundamental understanding of human nature. When threatened, particularly when they're young or endangered, humans display a psychological phenomenon they call righteous fury. Individual concerns, personal ambitions, even self-preservation instincts become secondary to the protection of their species. The display now showed the human fleet arranging itself into attack formations as they approached the Kepler system. The formations were unlike anything in standard military doctrine, suggesting tactical innovation happening in real time. The Skarn commander, Warlord Thektar, was a veteran of over 200 raids, Zethkar noted. His tactical record was flawless, his cruelty legendary. When he saw the human fleet approaching, he did what any experienced commander would do. He positioned his forces defensively around the colony, using the hostages as human shields. The holographic representation showed the Skarn formation. 3 heavy cruisers formed a triangle around the colony, with smaller vessels filling the gaps. It was a textbook defensive position, one that had served the Skarn well in previous encounters. Thektar transmitted a final ultimatum. Zethkar continued. He would begin executing hostages at the rate of 1 per minute until the human fleet withdrew. Standard procedure when dealing with species that value individual lives over military objectives. The chamber grew tense. Many of the assembled delegates had faced similar situations, and most had been forced to withdraw to prevent civilian casualties. The human fleet commander's response was broadcast on all frequencies, Zethkar said, not just to the Skarn, but to every listening post within 50 light years. The message was simple. You have 15 minutes to release all hostages and surrender unconditionally. After that, we stop trying to save you. The ethereal observer's energy pattern flickered with what might have been confusion. An ultimatum to the aggressors, while their own people were held hostage. Tactically unsound. That was Thektar's assessment as well, Zethkar agreed. He began executing hostages immediately, broadcasting their deaths to demoralize the human fleet. What happened next redefined our understanding of tactical precision. The display showed the opening moments of the engagement. The human fleet did not charge forward as expected, nor did they attempt to negotiate. Instead, They began what could only be described as a demonstration of surgical military precision that bordered on the supernatural. The first human ships to engage were not warships, Zethkar explained. They were modified industrial vessels, equipped with mining lasers and construction equipment repurposed for combat. They moved through the Skarn defensive perimeter like ghosts, their targeting so precise that they disabled weapon systems without damaging hull integrity. The footage showed Skarn vessels suddenly going dark, their weapon arrays sparking and dying while their life support and engines remained functional. The attacking human ships moved with an economy of movement that suggested they knew the exact location of every critical system on the enemy vessels. Impossible, muttered the Vorthak war chief. Such precision requires detailed knowledge of enemy ship designs, years of intelligence gathering. Indeed, Zethkar nodded. Yet later analysis revealed that the humans had never encountered Skarn technology before that day. They were reverse engineering and exploiting weaknesses in real time, adapting their attack patterns faster than the Skarn could respond. The battle continued on the display, showing scene after scene of tactical impossibilities. Human ships seemed to anticipate Skarn movements before they happened, positioning themselves perfectly to exploit every weakness, every momentary gap in enemy formations. Within 6 minutes of engagement, Zethkar narrated, the Skarn fleet was effectively neutralized. Not destroyed, you understand, but completely disabled. Their weapons were silent, their shields down, their engines dead. Yet not a single human hostage had been harmed in the crossfire. The chamber erupted in surprised murmurs. Such precision in the chaos of space combat was theoretically impossible, yet the evidence was undeniable. But the humans were not finished, Zethkar continued, his voice growing darker. What happened next demonstrated that their precision had not been born from mercy, but from a desire to deliver a very specific message to the galaxy. The display zoomed in on the disabled Skarn command ship, where Warlord Thektar was undoubtedly wondering how his perfect defensive position had been dismantled so effortlessly. He would not wonder for much longer. The human fleet commander transmitted one final message, Zethkar said, not to the Skarn, but to every intelligence service monitoring the battle. 5 words that would echo through the galaxy for generations to come. He paused, letting the tension build as every delegate leaned forward. Now we stop being gentle. #Alien Envoy issues warning. Humanity's fury shakes, even gods. The transformation that occurred in the human fleet after that transmission defied every principle of military doctrine known to the galactic community. Zethkar's compound eyes swept across the assembled delegates as he prepared to reveal the most disturbing aspect of humanity's nature. What the galaxy witnessed next, he began, was not the escalation of a battle, but the systematic demonstration of species' capacity for controlled devastation. The humans had spent the first phase of the engagement proving they could disable the Skarn fleet without harming their own people. The second phase would prove that this restraint had been a choice, not a limitation. The holographic display showed the human fleet reconfiguring. Ships that had moments before moved with surgical precision now began to glow with energy signatures that made the sensor readings spike beyond normal parameters. The first indication that something fundamental had changed came from the Skarn themselves. Zethkar continued. Thektar, despite his ship being disabled, managed to transmit a surrender offer. Complete capitulation, return of all hostages, reparations for damages. Everything the humans had originally demanded. The Centauri delegates' crystalline form brightened with confusion. Surely the humans accepted? Their objectives had been achieved. That, Zethkar said grimly, was when we learned that human objectives had evolved during the engagement. The human fleet commander's response to the surrender offer was broadcast across all frequencies. Too late. The display zoomed in on individual human vessels as they began their next phase of operations. What had appeared to be standard warships now revealed themselves to be technological marvels that challenged the fundamental laws of physics as understood by galactic science. The humans began what they termed educational procedures, Zethkar narrated. Each disabled Skarn vessel was boarded by human marines who moved through the ships with the same supernatural precision their fleet had demonstrated in space combat. The footage recovered from Skarn security systems showed human soldiers advancing through ship corridors with movements that seemed almost choreographed. They encountered resistance with a casual efficiency that suggested years of experience, despite humanity's supposed lack of military engagement beyond their own world. The Skarn crew members were not killed, Zethkar noted, at least not immediately. Instead, they were gathered into the ship's central areas and forced to witness something unprecedented in galactic warfare. The display showed human technicians working on Skarn equipment with tools that seemed to bend reality itself. In minutes, they were rewriting the fundamental programming of alien technology, turning the ship's own systems into instruments of psychological warfare. Every Skarn vessel's communication system was reprogrammed to broadcast on a specific frequency, Zethkar explained. A frequency monitored by every intelligence service, every military command, every government in this sector of the galaxy. The humans wanted the galaxy to witness what they were about to demonstrate. The Altarian delegates' wings fluttered nervously. What could they possibly need to demonstrate? They had already proven their tactical superiority. That tactical superiority was merely the opening act, Zethkar replied. What came next was a masterclass in technological innovation under pressure. The humans began systematically reverse engineering every piece of Skarn technology, not to copy it, but to improve upon it. The holographic recordings showed human engineers working with an intensity that bordered on the supernatural. They dismantled weapon systems and rebuilt them into configurations that produced energy outputs exceeding original specifications by orders of magnitude. They rewrote the code governing shield generators, turning defensive systems into weapons of terrifying efficiency. Within 2 hours, Zethkar continued, the humans had not only mastered Skarn technology, but had evolved it beyond anything the Skarn themselves had achieved in centuries of development. They took systems designed for raiding and slavery and transformed them into instruments of liberation and justice. The Vorthak war chief, who had been growing increasingly agitated throughout the presentation, finally erupted. Impossible. Technology does not advance that rapidly. Evolution requires time, testing, refinement. Your species thinks in terms of linear progression, Zethkar observed calmly. Humans, we discovered, think in terms of exponential leaps. When motivated by fury, they do not simply work harder or faster. They fundamentally reimagine the problem they are trying to solve. The display showed the modified Skarn vessels, now under human control, as they began broadcasting across the galaxy. The signal carried detailed schematics for technologies that made the most advanced galactic weapons look primitive by comparison. The humans did not keep these technological advances for themselves, Zethkar noted. They broadcast complete construction details to every listening post in the galaxy. Weapon systems capable of disabling entire fleets. Shield configurations that could protect civilian populations from any known form of attack. Medical technologies that could heal injuries previously considered fatal. The silence in the chamber was profound as delegates realized the implications. Humanity had not simply won a battle. They had advanced galactic technology by centuries in a matter of hours and freely shared their innovations with everyone. But the most disturbing aspect of this demonstration, Zethkar continued, was not what the humans built, but how quickly they built it. Our analysts estimate that the technological advancement displayed during those 2 hours would have taken our most advanced civilizations several hundred years to achieve. The ethereal observer's energy pattern fluctuated in what might have been distress. Such rapid advancement suggests cognitive capabilities far beyond what our assessments indicated. How is this possible? We believe, Zethkar said slowly, that humans operate under different cognitive constraints than the rest of us. While most species have evolved to optimize for survival and efficiency, humans appear to have evolved for adaptation and innovation. When faced with a problem they cannot solve using existing methods, they do not give up or seek help. They evolve the solution in real time. The display now showed the final phase of the human operation. The rescued hostages were being transported to medical facilities that had been constructed during the battle using technologies that had been invented hours earlier. The former captives were not just being freed, they were being healed of trauma using psychological techniques that most galactic civilizations were centuries away from developing. Every human civilian who had been tortured or traumatized by the Skarn was not only physically healed, but psychologically restored to their pre-capture mental state, Zethkar explained. The humans had developed and implemented trauma reversal technologies while simultaneously conducting a military operation. They were fighting a war and curing mental illness at the same time. The chamber began to buzz with nervous conversation as the full scope of human capabilities became apparent. These were not just formidable warriors or brilliant engineers. They were a species capable of fundamental reality alteration when sufficiently motivated. The Skarn crew members, Zethkar continued, were given a choice. They could face judgment for their crimes under human justice, which would involve forced psychological rehabilitation until they became genuinely remorseful and reformed individuals. Or they could be released to spread word of human capabilities throughout the galaxy. The Vorthak war chief leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. What did they choose? Every single Skarn chose immediate release, Zethkar replied. The prospect of human justice terrified them more than death itself. They had witnessed humans casually rewrite the fundamental nature of reality. The idea that humans might rewrite their personalities, turn them into better versions of themselves against their will, was apparently a fate worse than execution. The implications hung heavy in the air. A species that could not only defeat their enemies, but fundamentally transform them into allies represented a paradigm shift in galactic power structures. But the humans were not finished with their demonstration, Zethkar said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. What they did to Warlord Thektar himself would ensure that no species in the galaxy would ever again mistake human mercy for weakness. #Alien Envoy issues warning. Humanity's fury shakes, even gods. The atmosphere in the Galactic Council chamber had shifted from skeptical attention to mounting dread. Zethkar could see it in the subtle changes in posture, the altered breathing patterns, the way even the most battle-hardened delegates were unconsciously leaning away from the holographic display. Warlord Thektar, Zethkar began, was brought before the human fleet commander on the bridge of his own flagship, the ship that had been the instrument of his centuries of conquest and cruelty had been transformed into something that barely resembled its original design. The humans had not simply captured it. They had elevated it. The display showed the interior of what had once been a standard Skarn command vessel. The dark, utilitarian corridors designed to intimidate captives had been replaced with architecture that seemed to bend light itself. Surfaces that had been metal now appeared to be made of crystallized starlight, and the air itself seemed to hum with barely contained energy. The human commander who met with Thektar was not what anyone expected, Zethkar continued. No battle-scarred veteran, no grizzled warrior with cybernetic implants. Instead, the individual who had orchestrated the systematic dismantling of Skarn military doctrine appeared to be barely past adolescence by human standards. The holographic recording showed a young human woman, her uniform bearing no rank insignia, her expression calm and measuring. What was most unsettling was not her youth, but her eyes. They held a depth of understanding that suggested she had seen far more than any being her age should have witnessed. Commander Sarah Chen, Zethkar said, the name carrying weight that made several delegates shiver involuntarily. Age 26 standard years. Before the Kepler incident, she was a civilian engineer working on asteroid mining equipment. She had never served in any military capacity, had never commanded so much as a single vessel. The Altarian delegate's wings trembled. You're suggesting that a civilian with no military training commanded this operation? Not just commanded it, Zethkar corrected. She designed it. The entire tactical doctrine displayed by the human fleet was created by Chun during the 18-hour journey to Kepler. She invented new forms of warfare while traveling through hyperspace. The recording showed Chun standing before Thektar, who despite his imposing physical presence, seemed diminished in her presence. The Skarn warlord, veteran of countless battles, appeared to be struggling with a concept he had never before encountered, being utterly outmatched by someone he would have dismissed as insignificant. Chen spoke to Thektar in perfect Skarn, Zethkar narrated, a language she had learned from capture transmissions during her journey. Not just the words, but the cultural nuances, the subtle implications that native speakers spent decades mastering. She had absorbed an entire linguistic and cultural framework in 18 hours. The conversation between Chun and Fektar played on the display, translated for the diverse audience. What emerged was not an interrogation or a formal surrender ceremony, but something far more disturbing. Commander Chin was not interested in Fektar's surrender or his excuses, Zethkar explained. She was conducting what she called behavioral analysis in real time. She was studying him, learning how his mind worked, understanding the psychological patterns that had led to his centuries of cruelty. The recording showed Chun asking seemingly innocuous questions about Skarn culture, their history, their motivations for raiding. But, as the conversation progressed, it became clear that she was dissecting Fektar's psychology with the precision of a master surgeon. Within an hour, Zethkar continued, Chun had not only understood the fundamental drives that created individuals like Fektar, but had developed a comprehensive solution to prevent such individuals from emerging in Skarn society again. The Centauri delegate's form flickered with agitation. A solution? What kind of solution? Chun proposed what she called cultural rehabilitation, Zethkar replied. She had identified the specific aspects of Skarn society that produced raiders and slavers. Competitive resource scarcity, status hierarchies based on violence, educational systems that rewarded cruelty. She offered to restructure their entire civilization to eliminate these problems. The chamber erupted in surprised murmurs. The idea of restructuring an entire civilization's culture was beyond ambitious. It was godlike in scope. The most disturbing aspect, Zethkar noted, was not that Chun had conceived such a plan, but that she had the means to implement it. The technological advances her fleet had demonstrated during the battle were apparently only the beginning of human capabilities. The display shifted to show schematics that had been broadcast to Skarn territory. Technologies for abundance generation that would eliminate resource scarcity. Educational methodologies that could reshape cultural values in a single generation. Social frameworks that would channel competitive instincts toward beneficial rather than destructive ends. Chen offered to freely share all of these technologies with the Skarn collective, Zethkar continued. No payment required, no territorial concessions demanded. She simply wanted to ensure that what had happened to the Kepler colonists would never happen to anyone again. The Vorthak war chief stood abruptly, his massive frame trembling with something that might have been fear. You're describing the complete transformation of a species' fundamental nature. Such power, it's beyond what any mortal being should possess. That, Zethkar said quietly, was Fektar's reaction as well. When faced with the prospect of his entire species being lifted to a higher form of existence, he made a choice that revealed the true depth of human understanding. The recording showed Fektar's response to Chen's offer. Instead of gratitude or acceptance, he reacted with rage and horror. The idea of his people being transformed from raiders and conquerors into something peaceful and productive struck him as a fate worse than death. Fektar rejected Chen's offer, Zethkar narrated. He declared that he would rather see his entire species destroyed than changed. He begged for execution rather than transformation. Chen's response in the recording was delivered with the same calm precision she had shown throughout the encounter. She simply nodded, as if she had expected this reaction, and said, "As you wish." What happened next, Zethkar continued, demonstrated that human mercy and human justice are not the gentle concepts that most species assume them to be. The display showed Chen activating a device that she had apparently constructed during her conversation with Fektar. The warlord's expression changed from defiance to confusion, then to horror, as he realized what was happening to him. Chen had not simply been talking to Fektar, Zethkar explained. She had been rewriting his neural pathways, adjusting his brain chemistry, fundamentally altering his consciousness. She was giving him exactly what he had asked for, the complete destruction of everything he had been. The transformation was visible in real time. Fektar's aggressive posture softened. His cruel expression gave way to something approaching wonder. The rage and hatred that had defined him for centuries simply evaporated, replaced by a profound understanding of the pain he had caused others. The being that emerged from Chen's treatment was still Fektar, Zethkar noted, but a version of Fektar who was incapable of causing harm. He retained all his memories, all his skills, all his intelligence. But He was now psychologically incapable of cruelty or violence. The recording showed this transformed Thektar weeping as he truly comprehended, perhaps for the first time, the suffering he had inflicted on countless innocents. He begged Chun for the chance to make amends, to spend the rest of his existence helping those his former self had harmed. Chun granted his request. Zethkar continued. She appointed him as the new leader of the Skarn rehabilitation effort. Who better to understand the flaws in Skarn culture than someone who had once embodied those flaws? The implications hung heavy in the chamber. Humanity had not simply defeated their enemies. They had transformed them into allies by fundamentally rewriting their nature. It was a power that bordered on divine intervention. But the most terrifying aspect of this demonstration, Zethkar said, his voice barely audible, was the casualness with which Commander Chun wielded such power. She treated the complete transformation of a conscious being's fundamental nature as a routine administrative task. To her, rewriting someone's personality was no more remarkable than adjusting the parameters of a mining laser. The silence that followed was absolute. Every delegate in the chamber was grappling with the same horrifying realization. If humans could do this to their enemies, what might they do to their friends? What might they do to the galaxy itself if they decided it needed improving? The message Chin sent to the galactic community, Zethkar concluded, was not transmitted through words or formal declarations. It was embedded in every action, every technology she shared, every mercy she showed. Humanity was announcing its arrival on the galactic stage not as conquerors or traitors or diplomats, but as gardeners who intended to cultivate the entire galaxy into something better than it was. The chamber remained silent as the full scope of the human revelation settled over the assembled delegates. They were no longer dealing with just another space-faring species. They were confronting beings who viewed the fundamental nature of reality as something to be improved upon when convenient. #Alien Envoy issues warning. Humanity's fury shakes, even gods. The weight of Zethkar's revelations had transformed the atmosphere in the Galactic Council chamber from skeptical curiosity to existential dread. As he prepared to deliver his final warnings, the ambassador could see that every delegate was struggling with the same fundamental question: what did humanity's emergence mean for the established order of the galaxy? The aftermath of the Kepler incident, Zethkar began, has forced every intelligence service in the galaxy to reassess everything we thought we knew about human capabilities. What we discovered has implications that extend far beyond military doctrine or technological advancement. The holographic display now showed a map of the galaxy, with human space marked as a small cluster of systems near the outer rim. But the display began to change, showing expanding areas of influence that had nothing to do with territorial conquest. Within weeks of the incident, Zethkar continued. Reports began arriving from across the galaxy. Species that had never made contact with humanity were reporting technological breakthroughs that mirrored human innovations. Medical advances, energy solutions, agricultural improvements, all appearing simultaneously across thousands of different worlds. The Altarian delegates' wings fluttered with alarm. How is such simultaneous development possible? Are you suggesting human infiltration on a galactic scale? Something far more unsettling, Zethkar replied. The humans were broadcasting these technological advances freely on subspace frequencies that any civilization capable of receiving them could access. They were not conquering the galaxy through force or infiltration. They were uplifting it through education. The display showed communication logs from dozens of worlds. Species that had been struggling with resource shortages suddenly had access to abundance technologies. Civilizations locked in territorial disputes received diplomatic frameworks that made conflict obsolete. Plague-ridden worlds found cures transmitted from human space with no strings attached. But the most disturbing discovery, Zethkar noted, came when our analysts tried to understand the source of human innovations. We traced the technological developments back to their origins, expecting to find massive research installations or advanced laboratories. The Centauri delegates' crystalline form brightened with anticipation. And what did you find? Children, Zethkar said simply. Human children, some as young as 8 standard years, casually solving problems that have plagued galactic civilization for millennia. They were not even working on these problems professionally. They were treating them as recreational puzzles, intellectual entertainment during their leisure time. The silence that followed was profound. The idea that human children could outthink the galaxy's greatest minds as a form of play was beyond unsettling. We monitored human educational systems, Zethkar continued, expecting to find some form of advanced technological augmentation or genetic modification. Instead, we found something far more frightening. Humans appear to be naturally capable of cognitive acceleration under the right circumstances. The display showed footage from human schools, where children were being taught to think in ways that challenged fundamental assumptions about intelligence itself. They were not memorizing facts or following procedures. They were being trained to question reality itself and rebuild it according to better principles. A human child asked to solve a problem does not simply work within existing parameters, Zethkar explained. They question whether the parameters themselves are optimal. They do not accept limitations. They treat them as design flaws to be corrected. The ethereal observer's energy pattern fluctuated with something approaching panic. Such cognitive flexibility should be impossible. Intelligence cannot function without constraints, without accepted frameworks for understanding reality. Human intelligence, Zethkar replied, appears to operate under different rules entirely. When a human encounters something they do not understand, they do not seek to understand it. They seek to improve upon it. The recording shifted to show human scientists working on captured alien technologies. Instead of studying how the devices functioned, they immediately began redesigning them to function better. They treated advanced galactic technology as rough drafts of what technology should actually be. Within months of the Kepler incident, Zethkar continued, humanity had become the de facto technological center of the galaxy, despite having no formal diplomatic relationships with most species. Everyone was watching human subspace transmissions, waiting to see what impossible innovation would be shared next. The Vorthak war chief, who had been growing increasingly agitated throughout the presentation, finally voiced the question that was haunting every delegate. What do they want? What are their objectives? No species shares such power without expecting something in return. That, Zethkar said gravely, is precisely what makes humanity so terrifying. Our behavioral analysts have spent months trying to understand human motivations, and their conclusion is both simple and apocalyptic. Humans want to fix everything. The chamber erupted in nervous conversation as delegates grappled with this revelation. A species with godlike power and a compulsive need to improve things was every established government's worst nightmare. They see suffering and they develop solutions to eliminate it, Zethkar continued. They encounter inefficiency and they redesign systems to optimize them. They discover injustice and they create frameworks to prevent it from occurring. They approach the galaxy like engineers approaching a machine that is not running properly. The display showed intercepted human communications discussing various galactic civilizations. The conversations were clinically analytical, treating entire species as case studies in suboptimal social organization. Humans were casually discussing how to improve civilizations that had been stable for millennia. The question facing this council, Zethkar said, his voice carrying the weight of cosmic significance, is not whether humanity will reshape the galaxy to match their ideals. They're already doing so, and no force in the known universe appears capable of stopping them. The question is whether we can guide that reshaping in directions we can accept. The Altarian delegate's voice was barely above a whisper. What are our options? Limited, Zethkar admitted. Military confrontation is pointless. Humanity has demonstrated that they can outfight any conventional force while simultaneously inventing new technologies. Economic pressure is meaningless to a species that shares its innovations freely. Diplomatic isolation is impossible when they're solving everyone's problems. The display showed projections of galactic development under human influence. Within decades, species that had been enemies for millennia would find conflict obsolete as resource scarcity was eliminated. Worlds that had been barren would become garden paradises through terraforming technologies that humans treated as basic engineering. Diseases that had plagued civilizations for eons would be eradicated by medical advances that humans had developed as side projects. The galaxy that emerges from human influence, Zethkar noted, will be unrecognizable. not destroyed or conquered, but elevated beyond our current ability to comprehend. Suffering will be obsolete. Scarcity will be a historical curiosity. Conflict will be impossible because the underlying causes will no longer exist. The Centauri delegates' form flickered with desperation. Surely there must be something we can do to maintain some degree of autonomy, some preservation of our existing cultures and traditions. There's one path, Zethkar said slowly, but it requires abandoning everything we think we know about diplomacy and power. We must approach humanity not as equals seeking negotiation, but as students seeking education. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The great galactic powers, civilizations that had ruled star systems for millennia, were being advised to humble themselves before a species that had barely reached the stars. Humanity appears to be willing to teach, Zethkar continued, but they will not be deterred from their mission of galactic improvement. Our choice is to learn from them and guide the process, or to be swept aside as they rebuild everything around us. The final image on the holographic display showed the current state of human space. What had once been a handful of modest colonies was now a region of space where the laws of physics themselves seemed more cooperative. Planets that had been barren rocks now bloomed with life. Energy readings showed power generation that exceeded theoretical maximums. Space itself appeared to be more stable, more responsive to the needs of conscious beings. The humans have not simply mastered technology, Zethkar concluded. They have begun mastering reality itself. They are becoming something beyond our current understanding of what sentient life can achieve. And their mission is clear. They intend to elevate every conscious being in the galaxy to their level, whether we want to be elevated or not. The silence that followed was the silence of civilizations grappling with their own obsolescence, not through destruction or conquest, but through the arrival of beings who viewed the entire galaxy as a project to be improved. My recommendation to this council, Zethkar said in closing, is immediate and complete cooperation with human initiatives. Not because they have threatened us, but because they represent the next phase of galactic evolution. We could be part of that evolution, or we can be relegated to museums as examples of what consciousness was like before humanity taught the galaxy how to transcend its limitations. As Zethkar concluded his presentation, every delegate understood that they were witnessing a turning point in galactic history. The age of competition and conflict was ending, not through war or diplomacy, but through the arrival of a species that had made such concepts obsolete through sheer technological and cognitive superiority. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. They had simply made conquest irrelevant by offering something infinitely more valuable, the promise of becoming something better than what they were. And the terrifying truth was that this promise appeared to be genuine, achievable, and ultimately irresistible. The gods themselves, it seemed, had reason to tremble before beings who viewed divine power as merely another engineering problem to be solved.